my dear friends. I hope you all are doing well. The next chapter which we are going to discuss today, it's a little bit out of the field, that is the concepts of biomechanics. So before to start the biomechanics, the concepts, we must have to be clear about what is biomechanics. If we divide the two terms, bio and mechanics. So bio is for the body, whatever the individual or the living being. Mechanics is for the forces and other scales, other kind of that force, movement, velocity, how they applied in the movement of the human body in relation to joints, in relation to the bones, in relation to the tendons and the ligaments, how the movement can be completed. So when we're talking about this biomechanics, it is the study of living organism. It is a study of a living being, that how the different mechanical forces, how the different movement and the acceleration, displacement can be takes place. So if we're talking about these concepts of the biomechanics, so basically why we are going to study this biomechanics in the yogic practices. As we know that every individual has their different growth, their different body system. When we come to this anatomic coordinated system, so this anatomic coordinated system, like if in the coordination, if the movement is going on, suppose if we're talking about this joint has a movement like this, like this, like this, like this way, shoulder, right? The glenohumeral joint. Flexion is there, extension is there, slightly external rotation, internal rotation, and abduction and adduction. So if one of the structure is not performing well, or the neighbor structure, the surrounding structure are not performing well, or suppose not the glenoid cavity, the scapular socket which we call, if it is not performing well, or if there is a stiffness and inflammation or tightness, it also does affect the mobility of the humeral, the head of the humerus bone. So that's we say that whenever we have to move, there is an anatomically coordinated system we must have to be follow. We have to check, suppose in the poses, if I am going and if I am not able to perform this and I am pushing too much pressure on the neck, so my coordination, anatomical coordination of the shoulder is not right. So these kind of problems, these kind of mechanics we must have to be follow, or we must have to be checked at the time of practice with your student. Second, if we come to the degree of freedom, right? The degree of freedom, how much degree of freedom is there in my hip? Is my hip is moving in the flexion more or in the extension more? If it is moving in the flexion more, so I have to see how much kind of pressure I am putting on the hip joint. If the hip is going because of the flexion, it is compensating to the internal rotation, or it is compensating to the external rotation. So sometimes because of extension is less, flexion is more. So in the front leg, I can easily sit over there. In the back leg, it compensates. So sometimes my pelvis goes this side, sometimes my pelvis goes inside. So this movement, we must have to be checked that all the movement has to be in the balance. Because we are not only working for the flexibility, we must need mobility too. When we are holding a pose, so must be I can slightly transit little bit more deeper into the pose, so the joint has to be stable there. So it has not to be go right side, it has not to be go left side more. So the forces which is the force which is putting on your joint has to be equally distributed, and the joint has to be stable during the posture. Coordinated system, if we're talking about with the coordinated system. So when we're talking about the coordinated system, that each and every joint has to play their important role in each and every movement, right? Like each and every joint has to play an important role in each and every movement of the postures. Suppose we're talking about the squats. If I'm squatting here, if I'm squatting here, so I must have to be coordinate movement with my ankle, with my knee, with my back, with my spine, with my shoulders. Suppose that's why people say if your knee is going forward than your ankle here, if I'm putting my pressure more from the knee and crossing over the ankle, so more pressure I can feel on my knee joint and nothing I am feeling on my hip, and nothing on my feeling on my ankle joint. So if I'm putting extra stress on the knee, so what will happen? After some time, the knee ligaments, tendons, meniscus will try to get into the more injury. And after repetition of this wrong technique, without the coordinated system, what will happen? After some time, you feel knee pain and there will be no strength on the ankle and the hip joint. So that's why we say there is all the mechanics is there. We could not say only that I am forcing into the one structure only. If we talk about this, so we must have to be checked that knee has not to be crossed over the ankle, pelvic no overarching, it has to be engaged. And when I'm going for the squatting here, so it's not I'm dropping my upper back or the shoulders. I have to engage my core easily. Pelvic has to be neutral, knee engaged, I can feel my quads, so no extra pressure, and my ankle has equal amount of pressure. So we must have to be checked which is the big joint. Here the weight bearing has to be more, which is more smaller. Here the weight bearing is more less. So that is we call the coordinated systems. Like in any movement we are doing, suppose warrior 2. So if I'm putting again all pressure on the knee, crossing over the ankle, again the chances of the knee injuries. If I'm not activating my back leg from here, what will happen? Create extra stress on my front leg and automatically knee passes over the ankle. So it has to be here, engaging the muscles, not trying to force too much, equal weight bearing according to the shape and the size and the mechanics of the joint. So back leg has to be active, so I can create pressure where I need in the back leg more, in the front leg less. So then it can maintain the natural alignment of the body, and rather than the injuries, your joint becomes more resistance, your muscle strength will increase, and more blood circulation will go through of the whole joint. So it's not only with the physical structure of the body. We must have to be focused on the physiological structure of the body, because sometimes overloading of the physical structures, bones, tendons, ligaments, it also affects your blood circulation, the cell growth, and other kind of physiological activities in your body. Scalars and vectors. So scalars are the forces or the process which we say that consist of the time, for how much time we are doing, length, how much space we are creating, speed, the movement, mass, volume, how much we are doing, like repetition of the poses, and the work, how much energy it is involving here. So these kind of some factors that we consist on the scalars. Then the vectors, we consist of the principles of the displacement, force, movement, velocity, and acceleration. So these are the some basics that which must have to be focused. So these are the principles which we have talked about. Now, if we talk about the yoga in relation to the biomechanics, so yoga in relation to the biomechanics, we must have to see like the for what purpose we are using a pose, what is the chances of the injuries, if there is any instrument, or what we can say the technology which we using, or the training, which type of training we are trying to get the people ready for. So in the yoga, as we know, more static poses we develop. So if we're talking about like the instrument or the injuries, if I'm not taking a proper posture, like suppose we are kicking a ball here, If suppose sometime you're trying to kick a ball and how the displacement goes like this, if the more force comes to the back leg, the more pressure comes to your lower back, and this leg has locked, so more force is on the back leg, and you're trying, there is less pressure, and also it affects your other leg too. So there will be the chances of the injuries on the both legs. So your acceleration, how the acceleration is going on, it's not I'm creating whole pressure here, some pressure here, but this leg also has to be active. When I'm trying to get the kick over there, so this force movement has to become from the stability plus mobility from here. So same thing in the poses, like how to avoid these injuries, right? How to avoid these injuries. Simple pose if we are doing, trying to do standing one, the standing half lotus. If I'm trying to create extra pressure here, overstretching on this ankle ligament, no activation I will feel here. Hip joint also tilt over there. So I have to take, like if I'm not able to do, so I can practice with the tree pose to find the balance, and first must have to be checked the equal weight bearing and stability of the standing limb over there. So in this way we have to focus. When we're talking about the instrument, how we are using this instrument, if I'm trying to get a simple stretch over there for the hamstrings, so how I'm using that instrument which I'm creating. If I'm trying to get less space for the strap, if I'm trying to stretch and trying to press, this is the less space, so it is creating? It is creating the pressure on my hip joint. So maybe the chances of the injury is more rather than the hamstring to my hip. If I'm taking a long leverage, so leverage is long, so there will be the less chances to the injuries, and I can stretch my hamstring and my hip is more stable. So we don't have to force too much, that creating force. I am working on the mobility here. I am increasing the leverage from here and working on the stretch rather than the joint compression. Same time, with the same thing, sometimes we are using that simple example I am giving, like people using these blocks when they are doing this lotus pose or this sukhasana, like this way. Sometimes they are trying to using like this way. You are trying to using this way, but we are not focusing on the pelvis. So sometimes pelvis goes back and this knee goes upward. So the leverage or the weight bearing is not going to be in the equal way, because I'm not working on the pelvis here. My pelvis is tight, right? It is going to the backward direction into the posterior pelvic tilt. My knee is going upward because placing of these blocks. And if I'm trying to get this way, my center of gravity changes. So rather to do this, we can use place the blocks underneath your sits bone. So automatically the center of gravity comes into the center and you can try to sit like this way. So guys, these are some basic movement, right? That how the instrument which we are using, mostly the biomechanics apply on the sports. Like which type of shoes we are designing according to the level of student or according to the level of activity. Like sprint runners has a different shoes, marathon runner has a different shoes. We can take an example like the people who is working with the tennis player, right? So sometimes who play with the long hand racket, they have a different size of the that grip. Who is playing with the short hand racket, they have a different kind of the shape and size. So same thing in yoga, we have to just find on some simple concept, like whatever the movement which we are doing, it has to be coordinated. That's why in the alignment classes, we have described that pose and we break into the components. We don't have to go to the final pose. We have broken those poses into the components that each and every joint has their important movement. So that same movement has to come from the primary joint, not from the secondary joint. If we are using secondary joint, we are using secondary muscles, you're not using the primary muscle, and that will create more injuries. And then this degree of freedom. If I don't have a degree of freedom to able to reach here, this much my degree of freedom, I have to stay here. I don't have to try to press, I am staying here. If I am trying to press, sometime this movement happens. So my neck compression, my shoulder gaze, external rotation, elbow goes more internally. So that is wrong way. If I am here, that's it. I am trying to lengthen, same way, neck relaxed, spine straight, and trying to open the muscles and stretching the muscle over there, rather to decompress other joints of my body. So this is automatically, then when there is a coordinated system, degree of freedom, automatically it leads to the anatomic coordinated system. So there will be no extra stress on your joints, ligaments, tendons and bones. So we'll get more strength, more flexibility, plus mobility. So in the sports, in the yoga, we must have to be focused on the injuries, how the weight distribution on the joint, how much force we have to keep on the different joint, how is the vector is there, right? What type of leverage we are using when we are using the strap or when we are using the chair. So how the weight bearing has to be happen according to the shape and the size of the joint, my dear friends. So that's why we say functional training is most important rather than the stationary movement. So functional training, that how we have to move. Suppose if we are walking over there, we must have to follow. Most of the time we are not focused. So what happens? When the walking with the gait cycle, with the walk cycle, sometimes you're walking like this is happening. One side tilt. So when we are talking about this is the swing phase, right? The swing phase, this is the step phase, this is again the swing which we are taking, this is the step phase, this is the swing phase. Step phase, swing phase. Same thing we have to learn to go back, to make your proprioception, to make more joint effort and make use of the primary muscles, not the accessory muscles. So this way we have to train the beginners and the intermediate. Then the journey will be easy to get into the advanced practices. So I hope, guys, this must be clear to you. So biomechanics is not a little bit, we can say it is a small subject, a big subject, but in the yoga we must have to be focused with these three components. Like if the coordinated system is there, you can easily achieve degree of freedom and easily anatomical coordinated system which will not force too much to your joints and prevents you from the injuries. So always remember that the technique which we are using, injury prevention, right, instrument which we are using, it has to be placed properly, size, shape of the instrument, and your training process, in which kind of training you are doing. Like if you are doing for the sprint running, marathon, or in relation to yoga, if you are doing for the dynamic movements like vinyasa, ashtanga yoga, the joint has to be prepared first with the static hatha yoga poses, so you know how to bear the weight on the joints and which type of joint has to bear how much weight. So this is the easy key to prevent your injuries. So be safe, be away from the injuries, and get more extra benefits from your all the practices of yoga. So till then, namaste, enjoy your day, have a nice day.